Here to cover all things crime, history, and politics, we are at the desk. I'm your host, Lauren Perry, and in today's episode, we will be talking about the history of Iran and the current ongoing war. Now, come take a seat with us at the desk. Welcome back to ATD. First, it's time to send it over to the history panel to discuss the history of Iran. Over to you, Max.
Thanks, Lauren. Today we will be talking about the history of Iranian conquest of other territories, that is, major historical attempts and subsequent failures to conquer other locations. First, we will talk about the Imperial Age, the Achaemenid Empire, and the Sasanian Empire. Then we will talk about Safavid Iran and the early modern period, and finally Kahar Iran in the modern period. What do all of these conquest attempts have in common, and what do these patterns mean for the Iranian government today? So first, we are going to go through chronologically and talk a little bit about each era and some images that sort of represent their depictions of themselves and their art at the time. So first, we'll talk with Mason and the Achaemenid period. Go ahead.
Right. So the Achaemenids were the first sort of organized group of the Iranians. They were founded by Cyrus the Great, who is of the Achaemenid dynasty. Pretty funny. But their peak territory was around 5.5 million kilometers or 2.1 million square miles at their height. And this included territories from Anatolia, which is modern-day Turkey, to Cyprus, Mesopotamia, which is modern-day Iraq, all the way to Egypt. And there was a lot of conquest in this time. The original founding came from tribes out in Persia, which is now modern day Iran. And they organized together, fought against the Medes tribe, which is where they originally founded. And then once that happened, they kind of began pushing, and future kings would tack on more land. There was Egypt by Darius I, which kind of brought it to their height there. And then there was also a lot of wars over in Anatolia and in Greece. I'm sure you guys have probably all seen the movie 300 by now and about the Battle of Thermopylae and all that. That did happen. Not the most historically accurate movie, but that was a real battle. That is what really happened. The whole battle there between the Greeks that were in a huge league against the Achaemenids, who were at the time under Xerxes I. The Achaemenids lost, obviously, and then they got pushed out of Greece for a while, but they were also kind of supporting the Spartans during the Peloponnesian War, which that was because they wanted domination over the Aegean Sea, and Athens had this massive navy at the time that kind of threatened the Achaemenid navy, which was also pretty massive. So figure, hey, we'll fund these guys out in this land. We'll do a proxy war, and that'll give us kind of our own. It'll help us hold our stake, which is pretty similar to some stuff that's going on now, I would say. But I digress. But that is the major conquests of the Achaemenids, mostly naval battles and stuff, kind of going out, conquering all those places, gaining control of the Mediterranean, the Aegean, and the Persian Gulf.
Nice. All right, so there is the Achaemenids, and of course you can see this gorgeous map, which illustrates a lot of what Mason was just talking about. I'm up next with the Sasanian Empire. So they were from the 3rd century CE to the 7th century CE, and they were on whole handling a lot of the same type of land that was just pictured in the map. And the main conquests, or I guess fighting that they were doing, was against the Roman Empire, which of course was at a peak during that period. And the Roman Empire and the Sasanian Empire are just constantly trading territory back and forth. So before it's the Sasanians, it's the Persians. So it goes Persians, Sasanians. And there's this strip of land that's sort of near the mountainous region near Anatolia. And the Romans and the Persians just steal it back and forth from one another. And this becomes like a major thing as a Roman claim to fame, is they'll announce to the Roman people, guys, once and for all, I'm getting the Sasanian Empire. It's going to become Roman this time, guys, trust. And just countless Roman emperors just keep getting killed off by leading the missions that the Sasanians kill them on. And then meanwhile, the Sasanians also can't really get past it because the strength of the Roman Empire is too great. So then this image, I've talked about this a little bit on a flashback before, but it is certainly relevant here. This is a depiction of them making the Roman emperors kneel after they have basically failed. So this was created by the Iranians, and it's from something called the Shapur I inscription. So Shapur I was one of the first leaders in the Sasanian Empire. And Shapur really wanted to show everybody what he was all about. And he was like, well, I'm about making fun of these Romans. We're going to get them. So he did that. And he put them there. And so this is part of a greater inscription that is carved into stone. If you ever go to Iran, which I kind of doubt any of us will because of the current state of things,
Yes.
You will see that it is written in 3 languages. It's written in Middle Persian or Pahlavi. It's written in Parthian, which is very similar to Middle Persian. And then finally, it's written in Ancient Greek. And we have no idea who the scribes were, but basically the opening part is Shapur talking about the vague things he's done. And then he launches into about 30 paragraphs of listing every Roman territory he's conquered, up and down Rome, Greece, etc. So I think we can safely say that they weren't the most successful, but they definitely wanted an image of themselves that was very successful. And if you look at art that portrays the Persians throughout Roman things, they also sometimes will picture them in art. Like, for example, there's a scene in Trajan's column. Trajan was another Roman leader that depicts people who look like they were probably Sasanians. So that's very interesting. And now I will pass it over to the next empire. Go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you. So now we're going to go into a little bit of a modern, somewhat Iranian dynasty with the Safavid dynasty. Now, this was established in 1501 CE by Ismail I. And this was one of the largest and long-lasting empires in Iranian history. It's considered the beginning of the modern Iranian dynasty. An interesting factoid about this specific period is that they established their own central religion. Twelver Shi'ism was the official and it helped in establishing it as a united sense and distinguished itself from the Ottomans. And the Ottomans weren't too pleased about being distinguished from. They wanted to be, apart. Not apart, but like they didn't want them doing their own thing. So the Ottomans were very upset by this, and it started the Battle of Chaldrian, which was the Ottoman Empire going and trying to take land from the Safavid dynasty. And the unfortunate thing was for the Safavids, they tried their best, but the Ottomans just had more. They had more army, more military, better equipped, and it was a big loss for the Safavid dynasty and a big win for the Ottoman Empire. The Safavids had Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia, parts of North Caucasus, Iraq, but this really, they didn't lose it all, but they lost a good amount. It annexed eastern and Anatolia, there we go. And it halted movement in the west for the Safavid dynasty. And it began this 41-year battle between the Safavids and the Ottomans, back and forth. There's bad blood for so long, but it all came to a head with the Peace of Amasya. And the Peace of Amasya defined the border between Iran and the Ottoman Empire. And it brought 20 years of peace. In this treaty, Armenia and Georgia were divided equally between the two. A lot just shifted around I believe Iraq went over to the Ottoman Empire, and a lot just shifted around, but it didn't go great for the Safavids because they were outnumbered. And then it lasted for a long time, but it came to an end. There was a combination of internal strife, weak leadership, and again, pressures from the Ottomans continuing to happen. And the Hotak invasion happened, which is a successful rebellion that took over the Safavid Empire. So that's how it came to an end.
All right, this is very interesting. And then finally, the Khar Empire.
Yeah. So the Khar ran Iran. Sorry, I said I wasn't going to do that. Khar, Iran. It was lasted in power from 1789 to 1925, and there were two main conflicts with the Russo-Persian Wars and the Anglo-Persian Wars. So the first one was between Persia and Russia. Both of these battles that happened with Russia and the UK were territorial disputes. So first between Persia and Russia, it was a territorial dispute over the governance of countries in the Caucasus. And there were actually 5 total conflicts. Russia ultimately ended up winning in the 19th century wars, but they lasted from 1804, kind of splitting up periodically all the way into 1828, which is quite a long time to be fighting back and forth. And then for the Anglo-Persian Wars, which was between the UK and Persia, same thing, territorial dispute. British tried to oppose Iran to press claim on the city of Herat, if I'm saying that correctly. Yes. UK ultimately ended up winning and forced Persia to renounce all of its claims from the Afghan territory. And the war ultimately ended with the Treaty of Paris, which again, Persia had to leave Herat and had to recognize the Afghanistan's independence. And the main goal of that battle is the UK wanted to come in and wanted to separate the two and wanted to force Persia out of Herat.
That's really interesting. So now that we've got the full chronology, I have a question for you guys. So what do you feel like as you were reading and of course looking up on some of these things, the Iranians had the internal perception of themselves as? Like, how do you think they were picturing themselves on the world stage? Because I mean, I certainly, whenever we're in the United States, we have an image of what the United States is and how the United States is interacting with other nations. So do you have any thoughts about how they felt about themselves during the periods?
I mean, for mine specifically, they didn't back down. I think they thought of themselves as someone who could go toe-to-toe with the Ottoman Empire, despite, not having the right military. They were outnumbered significantly, but they didn't back down. They kept fighting. 41-year war they went through, and they were outnumbered, but they still went through. So I think it shows that they weren't afraid. They were going to keep on going. They were on a sort of a high horse where they thought of themselves. They weren't going to give up. They were going to keep going. So that's my impression.
Similar thing with the Achaemenids. I mean, they were the largest empire at the time and one of the largest empires in history. So one of the other things, though, they had going for them was they were the first true imperial navy. So a lot of these other countries or city-states had like these small naval militias where they maybe had a few boats, but the Achaemenids had this massive fleet that they built, and that's mostly how they waged war with Greece. Was they just sent all these boats out, and they were unique too, because naval warfare at the time, which you guys know by now that I'm very big on the Navy for reasons I've discussed now, but one of the major things they had going for them was naval warfare at the time was very much ramming the boats into each other, trying to tear holes into their hulls. The Achaemenids, however, took it and made it slightly more modern because they put projectile launchers known as mangonels, which were like tiny little catapults, on their ships so they could fire, rocks, anything on fire onto their ships, sort of like primitive cannons, which gave them the advantage there. And then similar to the American Navy today, they were very much posed to respond to any sort of crisis or any sort of situation in any of the waters they operated in. Because, I mean, they had naval bases up and down the Karun River. They had bases in Bahrain, in Oman, and Yemen, pretty much the entire Middle East. And they had ships everywhere. So if there was something happening in Greece, Achaemenid ship right there. Something happening in Egypt, Achaemenid ships, just ready to respond at any minute. So they had that going for them. So
Yeah, that definitely helps them out a lot. And I think I know that at least in my particular case, well, we see in the image, it's like I'm depicting myself as the proud Shapur and you are the poor kneeling Roman emperor who I'm about to like pour metal down your throat. But they also had another interesting exchange thing with Rome that I think really feeds into what both of you were saying about this proud image of like they're going to succeed. They had an exchange program where they had some of their like princes study and grow up in the Roman courts and vice versa. And so for the Iranians, this was the image of like, oh, we're making them take care of our people. So this shows our dominance over the situation. We're so powerful. They're watching our kids and doing all this work for us. And meanwhile, the Romans thought, wow, we have the princes captive. This is great. We're in control here. We're the dominant ones. So it's this interesting situation where both parties felt like they were winning in one particular scenario. But I think at the end of the day, it still does play to we're the ones in control. And there's a way that we can spin this situation such that we can tell our people, yes, we are in control. Yes, we are doing things in a powerful way. I mean, did you find a self-image in your emperor too?
Definitely. I mean, I think that everyone kind of touched on it. I feel like it's pretty prominent here moving throughout like all of these different time periods. But for mine, personally, Kahar, Iran was known for unifying all of their people after tribal chaos, focusing on cultural transition, social shifts, and modernization movements. I think kind of it feels like what you said, even after these like wars and battles that were lost, these territorial disputes, they really put a lot of their power into their people and still focusing on kind of gaining strength where they could and moving their empire forward despite kind of all of these different setbacks that happened. And kind of, I thought you said something interesting about their perspective about still feeling like they're winning, that they have this power in a situation. I think kind of that reframe that they had is really what kind of led them to, you know, just kind of unify the rest of their empire despite all these different setbacks.
Yeah. So I think it's really cool that there's this through thread. And I think I have one final question for you guys before we wrap up for the day. Basically, I know that today we're very concerned about what technology they have or don't have in terms of the military, right? Like that's a big question going around. So do you feel like they were ahead of their time in terms of technology? I know, Mason, you sort of touched on this, but militaristically, are they usually ahead, behind, just across history? What do you guys think?
I would say back when they had all these empires, they were definitely technologically advanced. Obviously with their huge fleet and everything. And then modern day, not so much. The Middle East has kind of been, you know, pushed by all these European nations, unfortunately. But they still have a lot of important infrastructure. I know they've got, you know, the oil industry and everything. And then they've got all these weapons that are coming in from Russia or China or these other nations. They're making their own weaponry. So they're not, I would say they're pretty much on the same footing as most other nations, just not to the same maybe quantity, I would say, since most of Europe has been kind of pushing on them for however many centuries now. So.
Yeah, I would also say back, they certainly had a good amount of technology. That's how they were able to keep up with the Ottomans. Without technology, who knows what the story would have been, but they had a certain ground of technology usage that got them to continue on throughout the whole eras, all the periods. It's because of the technology use, and it's still prevalent today, as Mason said, with the oil usage. It hasn't gone away, basically.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, I agree with the both of them, and especially having that strength kind of, you know, back in these earlier periods to be known as like a gunpowder empire, you know, with the Ottomans and with Mughal. I think that I do agree kind of as they progress, like they've kind of lost it a little bit, but I just kind of think that they've just kind of shifted a lot more of their focus on their power into different things. But I don't think necessarily the influence that they had goes away. Again, it's just kind of where they're putting their focus, if not on these militaristic technological advances, just kind of on different things that maybe they've just decided that they've needed for their empire currently instead.
Yeah, I think that's very true. So we've sort of seen their technology evolve over time, and I admit that I'm interested to see what happens now as we get updates day by day. But unfortunately, it looks like that's all we have time for the history panel. So we will see how the current Iranian situation is evolving as time passes, but if nothing else, we at least know what happened historically. And as they say, sometimes history is doomed to repeat itself. Back to you, Lauren.
Thanks, Max. We'll be right back to the politics panel after the break. We are once again back at the desk. It's time to send it over to the politics panel to discuss the war with Iran. Over to you, Vita.
Thanks, Lauren. Today we will be covering the war with Iran, the broader geopolitical implications, and what this conflict means for global stability moving forward. Over the past month, the war has been intensified with allied force Israel conducting extensive military operations and Iran responding through regional alliances and missile capabilities. So, Ryan, first discussion point, what are the long-term goals of this American campaign in Iran, and what is the effectiveness of a military decapitation?
Well, I'm a little confused about our goals in Iran, first of all, because we made it seem like it was about regime change, but it's really not about regime change, because the son of the former Ayatollah is still going to be in power, and nothing seems to have changed there. The goal, I guess, was to destroy their nuclear capabilities, but the reality is that while they had a high enrichment level of uranium, around 60%, which is close to the 90% needed to make a nuclear bomb, the IAEA, which watches over all the countries enriching uranium and requires them to allow them to do regular checkups on their facilities to see if they're building anything, have found that they have no evidence of a nuclear program, a weapons program, anything like that. So it's not that, especially since we said we destroyed all of their nuclear capabilities months ago, not just destroyed, he said obliterated. So what happens now is we're looking at it. We're going to claim victory like we always do, but Iran didn't control the Strait of Hormuz before the war. Now they do. Before, Iranian oil was sanctioned. Now it's not. Our bases in the Middle East used to be assets for us, and now they're liabilities for during and post-war. And so I'm just confused. What is the point? If we're going to pull out of there in just a couple of weeks, whether there's boots on the ground or not, all we've done is just take out their most of their navy, a lot of their missiles, but apparently they still have a ton of missiles, and none of their missiles, their ICBMs, can even reach the United States. That's the whole fear, that within the next 10 years, they can make a missile that can reach the United States. And they've been saying that since the 90s, and it's been 30 years since, and nothing has still happened. So I'm left wondering, often I am with this administration, what was the point? What is the point?
Well, I mean, the nuclear capabilities is a real and imminent threat. They've talked about their objectives, destroying the Navy, which they've almost done, destroy the Air Force, which they've practically done, hit a lot of their sites, and their missile capability. To your point of, it can't hit the United States, but they lied and said that they didn't have any long-range missiles that could hit our allies. And it comes to find out that they have the missile capability to hit the UK, which is extremely concerning. And to your point about the International Energy Agency, the fact is Iran has a long history of lying about their nuclear capabilities and what they're doing. You take it back to 1987, you go to 2002, 2003, 2006, when we made the terrible nuclear deal under Obama in 2013. And now they consistently lie that they're not making nuclear bombs. And every time we've come to find out that they are. And 60%. But
the evidence isn't there. The IAEA, I went through there. They investigated yearly.
They're enriching uranium. They have 440 kilograms of uranium, which if they got, this is 60% is near grade, according to the International Energy Agency. And if they were to use and finally get it to the 90%, they could make 9 to 12 nuclear bombs, which is extremely concerning, especially for a state that sponsors terrorism. They spend over $1 billion per year on their proxy groups that sponsor terrorism throughout the United States. And we're seeing that right now, and we've seen it in the past.
I just think at the end of the day, Wickoff and Kushner were making progress in negotiations with Iran. They said Iran was agreeing to a lot of things. And then right after the U.S.-Israeli airstrikes happened, so we just took away all progress. So we can all have our opinions or what's happening about the war, but it's just plain and simple black and white. We brought ourselves backwards. And now, like Ryan said, Iran went from not having control over the Strait of Hormuz to now, they'll have control over it, and they're going to make other parts of the world pay a fee to cross. So we've just brought ourselves backwards, and we've also proved ourselves to be an untrustworthy and corrupt administration.
Well, I think one of the big problems here is that it's undeniable that we've had immense military success on the battlefield. This is something that the United States is very good at. We've done it a lot of times before. We did it against ISIS. We did it against Iraq. We did it in Afghanistan. Every single time we're able to go into the Middle East and we're able to, destroy our enemies, cripple their abilities. Now, Iran still has some abilities, and we've seen that in the Strait of Hormuz, and we see that with their drone program. And so there's immense challenges here, but we've seen where we're able to go in there and take out our enemies. But the problem is that, especially when we're talking about pursuing war and democracies, that the tactical victories that we're able to carry out doesn't always, translate into political success. And I think that's the problem we're running into, is where at home, we didn't even start this war with the support of the American people. And that's a big problem that we're facing and that the administration's facing. And so what we need to do is, we're already in this situation, there's already these problems in play. And how are we going to be able to bring it to a solution where Iran does not control the Strait of Hormuz, and we're also able to do that without further putting ourselves into more endless conflicts, because that's what's happened in the past. You go back to Iraq, we came in there, we wiped out Saddam Hussein's regime in 3 weeks. Now, that's not the same situation here, but we've been able to cripple their military. And so I think one of the big problems is we stayed in there. And so are we able to pull out of this while making a deal? And that's what we need to focus on.
Well, I mean, I hear all of you guys bring up the Strait of Hormuz, which is fair. And for the time being, they have, controlled it. And I'll put that in quotes. But
they're charging people to go through.
It will last I guarantee the Trump administration will handle it. It will last at most 3 weeks. There's so many countries that this affects. This doesn't actually directly affect the United States. It indirectly affects them due to the price that we are actually energy independent. The other countries are not energy independent, which hopefully this sends a message to the UAE, not to the UAE, to the UK and our European allies that they can buy from us and other sources besides Iran. And Trump has mentioned that. And the Strait of Hormuz, Kuwait's not going to take this. The UAE's not going to take this. Bahrain's not going to take this. Pakistan's not going to take this. All the countries that border this strait, which are most of the Middle Eastern countries, are not going to take this. Iran is already crippled, and they can charge this fee for the next 2 weeks, maybe, and then they will be done. The military capabilities of the United States, our friends now in the Middle East, and our allies, who hopefully should be our allies in NATO, will be able to handle the Strait of Hormuz and get the gas prices down.
But Trump said that he was willing to make a deal without, or he was willing to pull out without making a deal on the Strait of Hormuz. Like if this war is going to end, it's going to be through compromise of the Iranian people. It won't be through total submission from them. And I mean, we'll go back to what you were saying, Tristan. We have these great military defeats, but the whole problem is what comes next. We leave these power vacuums, and it's happened time and time and time again. I mean, the post 9/11. They say around 500,000 civilians died at the hands of the United States, and that's through direct violence. Indirectly, through our crippling of their infrastructure, Medicare system, and all that, it's in the 3 to 5 million range. So what is the plan for, again, there has been no regime change. They say there's regime change, but there's no real regime change, it appears. What's the plan to make Iran more opened up and make it a less radical, more democratic country?
Well, I'd like to kind of direct our conversation to really what really sparked the war, the decapitation method, which was used against Khomeini. The decapitation method, as we know, is a very controversial way of changing leadership and has been proved to be highly ineffective. I mean, to your point, Ryan, there's a ton of examples of this. The decapitation of Iraq's Saddam Hussein, ISIS leader Abu Muhammad al-Danini, Libya's Muammar Gaddafi, these are all examples of decapitation methods that were proved to be unsuccessful because there was no democracy implemented after. Forced democracy has been proven to be entirely unsuccessful. And that was initially what President Trump said was his goal, to liberate the Iranian people and to give them the freedom to have a government that represents them authentically. That's literally not going to be caused by a violent and forced implementation of democracy. I think that's mutually agreeable.
I mean, and you're right on that point that democracy has not worked when America has went into it. Although once they struck and Trump put out his first Twitter video about the war the strikes that they were doing with Israel in Iran, there was no mention of regime change besides, hopefully, the Iranian people, we hope that, the time will come for you guys to rise up. But we have not seen since the strikes, besides saying that they would like regime change and it would be nice, they have not said that they are going to implement regime change. We don't even know if Khamenei's son is dead or alive at this point. We don't know. They've killed tens of their leaders at this point. So we don't know who's running the country, but in the Trump administration's defense at this point, since this has started, they have not mentioned that their goal, their objectives have not been regime change. It has been an underlying C point, a side bullet about that they would like it, but it's not.
That's how this all started.
That's how it started.
Thousands of protesters died because Trump posted, he said, America will be fighting with you, keep fighting your regime. And we didn't even have our aircraft carrier ready. We failed the Iranian people from the very beginning.
And I mean, if our military, if we can't even force a regime change through air raid alone and we have to put troops on the ground, dealing with Iran is a very difficult country. It is a huge country with some very difficult terrain to go through. I mean, what does it say about our military if we can't force a regime change this way in a country that's kind of destabilized already.
Well, there's
But that's
been
not the
like
objective.
if you look at the historical
What is-
record, there's been not a single country that any nation has been able to, impose regime change on through strategic bombing. That's just something that is completely ahistorical. It's something that's never worked. It didn't work, going back to the Yugoslav wars. It didn't even work in Libya, really. It wasn't the actual bombing of Gaddafi. It was the arming of insurgents in the country that overthrew that regime. And so that's something where there was never an actual situation where this was going to take place and there was going to be an overthrow through a bombing campaign. That wasn't
But
going to
what
work.
was,
But
what was that?
And
That
so-
was the campaign.
Well, what's the
That was the
what is-
original
No, but
campaign.
the
That's not the
objective that
goal.
they said, Marco Rubio's came out and said it, Pete Hegseth said it, and Trump has said it. Since they bombed beforehand, yes, Trump and the administration were
Well-
saying that they wanted regime change. But
Yes,
once
Thousands of
Exactly.
people are dead, and now that's
Yes.
a change in response, though.
that is the fact of the matter, but at the end of the day, once we've struck, we are trying to get to the point where we can help potentially these people. But the objectives of these strikes, of the war, Trump is wrong for telling the people, I agree with you, and that's a failure of the administration. But since they struck now 30 plus days ago, the objectives have been clear. They cannot have nuclear. We're going to take down their Navy. We're going to take down their Air Force.
Well, we were close to a deal, and then they struck.
There's no evidence of us being close to a deal.
That's what the
They said
Iranian
that.
president
Well,
said. He said they were close to a
Why are
deal.
we taking them at their word?
I
They've never
think
been
so.
on
I
us.
think both
They-
Trump said
administrations.
What
They
they
said they
said
were
was they
close
were
to a deal.
close to a deal on the principles of what they were going to talk about. They were close to making a deal on going to have a conversation to make a deal. So the actual layout of an agreement was never close to happening. And that's the big
It
problem
was
here.
closer than it
is
was
that-
when we struck them.
No, and now they're coming to the table and they know we're serious. But again, Iran has never taken us
Oh.
seriously. Obama, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, Trump the first time. We've just thrown sanctions and empty promises. And at this point, they knew we weren't going to do anything, and they continuously
No, we were
lied
a
and
joint
broke our nuclear
comprehensive
promise.
plan of action,
And that was
with other
terrible.
countries. No, and then Trump pulled out of it in 2018, and
'Cause
it
it
was
was bad.
making progress.
Well-
No, there was U.S.
The problem with that,
naval presence in the Strait of Hormuz. There were aircraft carriers in the region. We had control.
There
and
was
then the
concerns
Trump
of-
administration pulled out in the first term.
there was concerns with revving up production when time expired with that joint comprehensive plan you're talking about. It did not allow for inspections. It did not talk about ballistic missiles
There
and the
were
drones that
inspectors,
they're using
and
right
other
now.
countries were in it.
They-
There was Germany,
and they released the
Russia
present
was there,
funds.
and Russia was there. The UK was
Russia.
there. Other countries, yes. And now, I mean, let's not talk too badly about Russia because we're helping them. we're relieving their
lifted the oil
sanctions.
sanctions.
They're becoming richer off of this war.
Well, wouldn't the strikes, couldn't it be argued that they're counterproductive towards working towards a deal? I mean, wouldn't this only incentivize Iran to want to obtain nuclear weapons
Yes.
even more?
Who says the new regime or who says the new leaders that come in aren't even more radical than the last ones? And why wouldn't they be?
Well, I mean, but Iran has made a mistake of hitting their, which usually the people in the Middle East, the countries, like I said, Kuwait, Bahrain, even though right now the Saudi Arabia and UAE was friends with Trump before this, but they wouldn't be supporting American efforts in the Middle East. But then they go, instead of striking us, they strike all these different spots in Saudi Arabia, in the UAE, and they've caused what should be their allies in the Middle East. They've then caused enemies. They don't have really anyone besides Iran and China China and Russia, who are saying we don't agree with the strikes, but they're not doing anything to help them.
I'd like to.
Actually,
Go
an
ahead.
Iranian foreign minister was on MS Now, formerly known as MSNBC, and he claimed that Iran had ongoing military cooperation with Russia and China.
Well,
So they're
we're talking about
obviously
the Gulf countries, not Russia and China. And it's actually kind of surprising how much the Gulf states have actually turned towards the United States. This is something that I was actually shocked about. I was expecting them to, call for the United States to end conflict, but they've actually been very supportive. They just today said that no more Iranians are going to be able to come into their countries or transport through their countries.
They also
You've
said
had
that they're
our
not gonna
allies
help
actually
US
join
and
up.
boots on the ground.
But roughly an hour before we went on air, Trump said, "Go get your own oil" to Western allies. My question to you guys is, how is this war going to change U.S. allies in the relationship with the Trump administration?
I think it shows how poor of our allies that we have when it comes to our NATO pact, we all will defend each other and help each other out. And you don't have to join the war efforts with us, but you can certainly let our military land planes in your bases. Spain has been a total disgrace. France has been a total disgrace.
Why are
Well,
other
they're
countries
because we
responsible
proved
for
Because
the
they're our
allies
allies.
for
They haven't done anything.
They're not our allies anymore.
We've paid for NATO since the beginning. We've paid for the UN. They just rely on us, and they have not been able to cement themselves as a good
Well,
and
Trump's
reliable.
actions hurt them because
If-
now they're going to have to pay fees. Everything will be more
They
expensive.
should be paying more because they were paying less than 2% when they weren't even paying the 5% on the NATO defense spending.
Well, and it vindicates all of the arguments about how NATO is not ready. Whether or not you support the war in Iran, we can see that, you look at the United Kingdom, who's supposed to be our top ally in NATO, and they were not able to get a destroyer ready to deploy to the Middle East for 3 weeks. Like, you have a complete crisis of military incompetence across Europe, and that's something that we need to address if NATO is supposed to be solvent for the future.
So we have through the first year and a half, year and 3 months or so of the Trump
Yes.
administration, and even a little bit before that, Trump has done nothing but alienate and attack and go after our allies, putting sanctions, tariffs, whatever. Why would they want to be included in this battle? And I know they're in NATO, I know they're part of our allies, but we have done nothing but alienate them for the past year now. If you look at Greenland, what's happened with Greenland since then? We threatened to take it over, and now it's not going to happen.
And then we had talks, and it actually made them talk. And we know that's Trump's art of the deal. He's done this in business, and the president, whether we agree with it, if it works or not, we can have
It's
that
just
whole
in the current
discussion.
victory, no matter what happens.
But our European allies have for so long freeloaded off the United States and have not been helpful. Like I just said, they were not paying for the defense in NATO. And Trump is actually the first president, although it hurts maybe our NATO allies, even though they don't defend us or even help us. And they weren't doing what they had to do of just simply paying the fee.
Well-
Like you said, their military is incompetent. There's just things that the European allies aren't doing well that makes us like, why do we
But I
even
mean,
need them?
if you're seeing it from a different perspective, like there has been a lack of transparency on both behalf of Iran and in the United States. There's one side saying we're coming close to a nuclear deal, and Iran just said absolutely not. Why would NATO want to involve themselves in something like that?
Because they're our allies. That's what
But
they're
that's
supposed to
a-
do.
We've shown we have a great distrust and disliking for our allies over the past year and couple of months.
Well, and that's why, whether you can agree with it or not, we have had to go to our strongest ally in this instance, and that is Israel. They are the United States' strongest ally because they will.
just said they're not going to help us if we do boots on the ground. They're not sending
Israel?
their yes.
That's fine because we don't need them to get. I don't agree with getting boots on the ground. No one should help that.
Well,
no one should be allowing that.
Let's talk about that a little bit. So, what do we think? Are ground troops going to land in Iran? What's the future if that happens?
I think it happens in a very small amount, and then I think it ends shortly after that. I think it'll be mostly for show, and we're going to go in there, and they're going to march through somewhere, they're going to declare victory, they're going to leave, and then this is all over. I think this ultimately just ends in not total, not destruction. I mean, I think this ends in compromise with Iran.
Maybe. Although they said they're not even compromising. They want full control over the Strait of Hormuz now, and they're not backing
They can't
down.
get that. They won't be able
No,
to.
but I don't think they'll be so quick to compromise with us. And it's just sad because soldiers are losing their lives, and we've hurt the whole world to be worse off than we were before.
I don't know if we've necessarily hurt the whole world. This is kind of what had to happen. The prices have raised for a short while, but
It's not what had to happen. There was no need. They had a deal. They were
there is
negotiating.
no, like I
These
said, there
strikes
is
were not
no
necessary.
evidence of a
And the
deal.
American people had no benefit whatsoever from it. And that's why there's such a high disapproval rate.
That's true.
Can argue for
Tristan,
safer.
any last thoughts?
Well, I think we can all agree we don't want to see a war go on in Iran. We don't want to see the U.S. get further involved in this. And so I don't think we're going to see troops on the ground. The president has signaled that, he's willing to make a deal that doesn't necessarily, constitute the United States having control of the Strait of Hormuz, which would be really the only option would be to put U.S. troops on Karg Island and cut off the oil exports of Iran. So I think we're not going to see that. And I think what we need to see is strict limits put on containing Iran so that we don't get drawn further into a conflict with Iran where we have to put boots on the ground. That's what we need to do so we can stay out of the conflict and not get drawn in again like we did in Iraq.
I just don't like paying $4 for gas.
Sure.
Okay. Well, that is all the time that we have for today for the politics panel. We will all continue to follow the war and as we remain hopeful for peace. Back to you, Lauren.
Thanks, Vita. Sadly, that's all the time we have for today. In the meantime, stay updated with all ATD on our socials at PSU at the desk and let us know what you want to see us cover next. I'm Lauren Perry, and we will see you back at the desk next week.